Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address for you is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Once again, I'm joined by guest guru, Mr. Darshan Kulkarni. He's actually a guru producer, and we'll talk about that at the end of this video. But Darshan is an attorney, and you don't specialize because we're not allowed to say that, but you focus on
That's right.
clinical trials, pharma, FDA, things like that, compliance.
Yes.
And just check him out. His Twitter handle's at FDA Lawyers. And as you can see behind him, his company is Kulkarni Law Firm. So if you want to check him out, I'll put links to his Twitter and his website on this blog post once this video goes up. So thank you very much for coming on, Darshan.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
And there's been a lot in the news lately. This is December 2012 from those of you watching from the future, so welcome. The world has not ended yet. It's December 10th.
Yeah, it's supposed to be December 22nd when it ends, right?
21st. 21st.
21st.
We have 11 days left. So nothing matters. None of this stuff we're about to talk about matters. Right? Or it matters very much.
Or this is the end of the world.
So it either doesn't matter at all, or it matters very much. You choose. Anyways, the thing that's been going on in the news lately is off-label marketing and promotion by Pharma of their various different drugs. And maybe Darshan can explain what off-label marketing actually means before we get started.
Sure. So the idea is that, as we all know, when you take a drug from concept all the way through to commerce, what you're really looking to do is prove that the drug is safe and efficacious. To do that, what you do is you do a bunch of clinical studies, and you're proving that the drug does what it does, and the risks associated with the drug do not outweigh the benefits. Once you do that, you give it to the FDA, and the FDA says, for the indication you tested for, the risks either do or don't outweigh the benefits. That's really the goal of all the clinical trials and everything we do. Once you do that, you get to say on your package insert, on your label, that this drug does X. Now, physicians and healthcare providers can recognize that a drug was approved to do A, B, and C, but it is actually also able to do X, Y, and Z. So this ability to use drugs for something that it wasn't approved for is known as the practice of off-label prescribing.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors are allowed to prescribe drugs off-label within the regular course of their practice. However, until recently, pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies were not allowed to promote these drugs off-label for these off-label indications, even if this discussion was completely legitimate and was well supported. So there was a recent decision in the Alfred Coronia case from what's called the Second Circuit, which is a bunch of states, in which New York is one of them, where a sales rep actually had a discussion with a doctor on off-label indications of a drug, and the FDA, DOJ, and I guess FDA, DOJ in this case primarily, went after this person, and he was being criminally prosecuted, and that became a pretty big deal. The Second Circuit came out and said that we disagree, and we think that is a violation of his free speech rights, and that should not be allowed. The government cannot restrict free speech just because it doesn't like the speech being spoken of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So we got a good idea of what off-label promotion is. It's been going on, whether it's been allowed or not, forever, probably. I mean, how can you prove that it hasn't? When a sales rep visits a doctor, they can say whatever they want to say in the privacy of that room, right?
Well, actually, there's something called the Bad Ad Program. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Okay, so the FDA probably about, I think, 2011 was when it started. The FDA basically deputized, and I like to use the word deputized because it sounds fancy, but
it does.
it deputized healthcare providers and said, if have you ever been to New York?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah. You know where this? If you go in the subway stations and they say, if you see something, say something.
Right.
Right, so it's sort of like that. They told all healthcare providers, if you see drug reps talking off label or sort of promoting the drugs in a not so good way,
Right.
tell
Right.
and you would be surprised. I think in 2011, based on the report I heard from the FDA in 2012, they got 400 odd complaints. Not all of the only. I think they were really worried that competitors would keep talking about each other and sort of
Right.
pushing each other. Turns out it wasn't that. It was a lot of healthcare providers reporting on these people.
Complaining. That's
Yeah.
because their drug companies are no longer taking these doctors to Hawaii. They're not even giving free pens anymore. So they're
They're
pissed off.
Well, they are pissed. Well, I'm not sure they're pissed off. In fact, there's a whole problem that everyone's so afraid of working with industry that it's actually affecting prescribing. Like there were some studies done recently, and I know we're going off topic.
Mhm.
There was a study done recently that doctors who don't see drug reps, for example, are I think what was it? They're the slowest. They did a study like 1 out of 4 doctors who don't see drug reps. They're the slowest to get information on adverse events that they probably know about when they're prescribing drugs. They don't know about the latest treatments out there.
Okay.
So there is a reason to go see these drug reps. But I think doctors need to sort of recognize the value of drug reps and sort of be able to weigh the information that these drug reps provide.
Yes.
Related to that is also the Sunshine Act, as we know that there's been a whole bunch of transparency initiatives around that, and doctors are less willing to participate in things that most people would say is a good thing, things like clinical trials. They're told that we're going to, even if what you're doing is completely legitimate, we are going to take your name, put it on a website, and say you take money from pharma.
Right.
For doing a clinical trial.
Right.
So a lot of doctors are very upset. Well, they aren't necessarily as upset about it as much as they just don't want to be known as shills for pharma, if you will.
Right, and what people don't understand, and we are getting off topic, is that the money that those PIs receive, most of it, I would say 80 to 90% of that goes to their staff, overhead, cost of doing business, things like that. So they don't take that into account. They just take the lump sum and say, this is what Dr. XYZ received from Pfizer for doing clinical trials last year.
It again depends.
So before we got cut off, Darshan explained what off-label promoting was, and now we're going to talk about how it impacts clinical trials, because that's what I'm paid the big bucks to do, to ask these kind of questions. So how does this impact clinical trials, Darshan?
So the average drug company, when they are getting a drug approved, needs to go through about 92 different clinical trials. That's the number I've heard thrown around. If that's true, but the number of studies you need to have to be able to say something off-label is one. You just need to be able to say that in X study we noticed this. And that's one of the concerns the FDA has. The FDA's concern is that drug companies may not appropriately vet and disclose the limitations of their own studies, and they need someone like the FDA to keep them on track. So the impact on clinical trials would be that the number of off-label study trials that happen would probably skyrocket. Assuming this decision alone won't do it, because all we have is one jurisdiction saying that off-label advertising is not per se illegal, but there are different discussions happening, and there are across the country. But assuming that the FDA agrees to this new standard, which if it goes to Supreme Court, that may very well be what the FDA has to do. One of the other things that may happen is a situation where the FDA is going to have to change its position, and pharmaceutical companies may be able to do more studies supported by to support off-label indications. And basically depend on the practice of medicine to develop and develop its own internal guidelines. And that's not to say that that's completely unsafe. You often see physicians and healthcare providers work off of off-label conditions. In fact, I think I read a statistic that and when it comes to cancer, 80% of all treatments are off-label. because cancer drugs just don't have this evidence behind them. So, but you obviously can't go treating every single thing. So doctors develop their own protocols and they go find out, and most cancers are being treated off-label anyways. So Megace, for example, is another situation for what's called cachexia, wasting away towards the end of your life. You don't want to eat food, you don't get hungry, you don't do anything. So there's a drug called Megace that makes you hungry, gives you the munchies. The other drug that does it is literally Marinol, which is a weed. It's a tablet form of weed. But Megace is used off-label all the time for this stuff. And I can think of most drugs have an off-label indication if you think about them. Antibiotics.
So we might see now. Will we see more clinical trials, multi-center clinical trials, or will these pharma companies get smart and say, "Well, we just need like one site to do this off-label study, and if it works, fine. If not, it's okay. So we'll just use whatever site we like best."
Here's what it comes down to: how much do you believe in your drug, and how good is your marketing effort going to be? Most physicians and most healthcare providers are wise to the idea that a 10-person study in rural Kansas with a doctor who's never done clinical trials is probably not as valuable as a multi-center, multinational study.
Right.
So most doctors will ask those questions. What was your p-value? What was your confidence interval? How many patients were involved? What were the inclusion-exclusion criteria? Those questions are actually asked, especially if you're talking about off-label things. So chances are, if a drug company really doesn't believe in their drug, but they're just sort of hoping that things work out, they may say that, you know what, I'm just going to do it in one place. But if they think that this indication actually has some merit behind it, I'm going to do a multi-center, multinational study.
So now, if they want to promote off-label, are you saying they have to do the trials and then go back to the FDA?
That's the thing. No one really knows, because we don't even know if the FDA will agree to this decision. But as it stands right now, no, because as long as you're doing a study, to the extent you just have to do a clinical trial, you have to do a clinical trial. And you may need to reach out to the FDA for it, but you don't need anything more beyond that.
So you can prove to your doctor that, hey, we didn't take this to the FDA, but we've done our studies and it's shown. Okay. Now, is there any potential conflict there as far as them manipulating the results or anything like that if they're not getting FDA audited, or?
Well, they'll still get FDA audited.
Okay.
Because the audits still come through. It's a clinical trial like any other.
Okay.
What you're not getting is a vetting of the final data. Looking at, if the FDA typically has to deal with, say, an NDA, they look at all 92 studies and say, okay, let me see what is the good news, what is the bad news, all those things. In cases like this, you may not have such a wealth of data. You may only have bits and pieces of data.
I see.
So that's what the problem is.
Very interesting. So this is positive news for the clinical trials world.
It is positive news for the clinical trials world. It may also be positive news for clinicians. It's very bad news for, some would argue, for patient advocates and for the FDA, especially the FDA, because if the FDA's role is to protect the health and welfare of patients, which it is, the argument is, can they do a good job with that if they can't control the information being given out? Patient advocates say, well, doesn't this affect patient safety? And it very well might. But the counter argument to that same thing is, okay, so if it does limit patient health and safety, would you rather the doctor know more information or less information?
Right.
Would you rather it come from the person who has the most information or not?
And on the flip side, it could also help a lot of people.
Exactly. So it could help a lot of people as well. So it really comes down to what you think will happen. Now, people argue that pharmaceutical companies have a vested interest in lying. And let's be clear about this. This opinion in no way protects lying. In fact, it goes out of its way to say if it's truthful, it's protected. And if it's not truthful, it's not protected speech. And therefore, you can still be prosecuted for everything.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. When are they going to be deciding whether the FDA can review these studies or not? Or is there a timeline for this?
The FDA will, well, I think your question is, so the FDA doesn't have the authority to review a study that's not part of an IND or an NDA. That's just not their job. So as a company, I could do 50 studies not part of an IND, NDA, and if I don't submit for an IND or an NDA, the FDA has no jurisdiction to approve the studies, if you will. As it relates to the safety, health, welfare, all those things, yeah, most definitely the FDA will still have that right, just like any other clinical study. But as to what happens now in the promotions world, there are 4 different options that companies have. Well, that exist right now. Number 1, the case gets appealed directly to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can say yes or no, we'll take it up next year. Option 2, the case is reheard in the Second Circuit, and the Second Circuit basically has what's called a en-banc proceeding, and what that means is typically 3 judges in the appellate courts hear these decisions, but if it's such an important decision, you might have 9 judges hearing it before it goes to the Supreme Court. So that's option 2. Option 3 is there's a second case going on in actually San Francisco, I believe. Scott Harkinen, who was the former CEO of Intermune, I believe, and he had a situation.
So we're talking about Scott Harkinen, Darshan?
Yeah. So with the Scott Harkinen decision, what you might land up with is a situation where where you basically could have the courts come back and say, you know what, we disagree with the Second Circuit, and you have what's called a circuit split, which is code for 2 courts in 2 different areas of the country interpret the same law differently. Then the Supreme Court doesn't like that because it likes the laws to be interpreted the same way across the country. So then the Supreme Court will typically hear these cases if you have what are called circuit splits. So we discussed 3 options, and then the 4th option, which is in some ways the least likely, which is the FDA comes out and says, we will respect the decision of the Second Circuit, and we will obey whatever they said. But we don't know if that's going to happen. So to answer your question directly as to how long, it depends on which path they take and what they intend to do with that path.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on this. I'm sure everyone will be interested, even clinical trial people now. So thank you, Darshan. And I wanted to give a clinical trial guru producer shout out and a plug. $99 for lifetime membership. And I'm telling you, I'm only accepting 100 people. So eventually I'm going to increase this. But the ones who already paid, that's it. They're lifetime members. So I want to give a shout out to Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, Erdhart Clinical Trials, PTNR, Patrick Stone from Tradestone LLC, of course Darshan Kulkarni from Kulkarni Law Firm, Biopharm Systems, Zymewire, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, and South Coast Clinical Trials. So thank you guys, and I mean $99 for life.
And you can't beat Dan for advertising.
No, and I had a Russian guy on, and who I was interviewing about clinical trials in Russia. And I sounded really stupid because I said for $99 you can buy vodka, or you can buy a membership. And he said, actually, vodka is like $5 in Russia. So I felt really dumb because here in the States, if you want a good vodka, it's like $40-$50, right? Yeah. Could easily spend $100. Well, in Russia, the people's vodka is only $5.
There you go.
So anyways, become a guru producer and you won't regret it, all right? And thank you, Darshan, very much. This is Dan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Take care.